Okay, so we will continue in this video on the different types of interviews. So now we will discuss that there are different types and they also depend on different perspectives. So we will focus on at least 4. So I will start with the number of people that you can interview at the same time. And that comes to what we call individual or focus group or even a group interview. And all of them have advantages and disadvantages because, for instance, if you do a focus group or a group interview, you will collect a lot of data, a lot of different views just in one moment. So that is great at some degree because you have many perspectives, but then the disadvantage is that maybe you don't have enough depth, right? Like when you individually interview someone, you have more time. Then another issue is that maybe if you have a focus group, you might bias the respondents, like because then everyone hears the other. Maybe that will bias the answer. So be careful on that. Maybe an ideal study in very general view is that maybe you can have both, like some individual interviews, some group interviews. So then you have a lot of broad and a lot of depth at the same time, but you have to evaluate the advantages and disadvantages. And the most important thing is that when you write the methodology section and you state that you did individual interviews, for example, is that you justify why individual interviews. So highlight the advantages of individual interviews if that's your choice. Then the next dimension is on how do you do the interviews, and we have at least face-to-face, computer-assisted, or telephone. So I think we already discussed this a little bit on qualitative research videos, but face-to-face usually is the one that we think is more powerful because you have a grasp and you can see the person and you can kind of intuit what they are saying with their face and body language. So it is a great tool. Also, when you are already there, because maybe you will meet in a place like in their place, maybe you also can have some observations of the place. So it's also very useful. But now, and we had to do this during the COVID pandemic, Zoom calls are great. And also if you have a Zoom call, there is also, I think there is like an add-on that can help you to transcribe the interview, and probably it gets everything right on 90% of the time. So it is a good idea also to do a Zoom interview. And finally, also by phone, but it's not really that relevant right now. I think like most people prefer Zoom. But anyway, it's the same issue. Depending on what you choose, you just have to be able to justify it. And at the end, maybe it's also related to practical issues, like maybe you didn't have enough time to travel, so then you decided to do it by Zoom. When you write your method, highlight the advantages of the Zoom and recognize the limitations of doing it in Zoom. I mean, like, don't say that you only did it because of practical reasons. Exploit the advantages and acknowledge the limitations. Then another very interesting perspective is on the type of interview regarding the formality, because I think that most of the books focus on very formal situations when you isolate the individuals and then they have all of your attention and it is a very well-planned interview, which is the ideal case. But sometimes interviews can't be that formal, like maybe the respondent doesn't have enough time, or there are ethical issues or whatever that makes it difficult. So the formal is the ideal interview, like you are in a very quiet place and then you are able to record and all of this. But it is also possible to be semi-informal, like maybe you are in a conference, for example, and then you have some time to talk with someone, like after a meeting or whatever, like after a panel, and then you have maybe half an hour where you talk and you can even record it or not, but that is semi-informal. And then you also have like the very informal things, like for example, when dealing with a family business, sometimes the people will invite you to a family event or something, like maybe there is like lunch or dinner and then they invite you to that. And then in there is a lot of data going on that you can collect as well. So it is also kind of like a type of interview, very informal, and where you lose a lot of power, but sometimes, but still you can push your agenda in the conversation and then collect data from there. So it is also possible to do that. And when you talk about this in your method section, you have to also inform the reader of why these were relevant. Why did you have to do informal rather than formal? Because all the readers prefer formal, right? So why is it that in this case, it was informal, and what are, again, advantages and disadvantages? And finally, very, very important thing, the type of interview in terms of the structure. There are three types of interviews: the ones that are structured, where you have a very clear and very strict interview guide when you have the questions that you will ask. And in the structure view, when you do the interview, you only ask that. You don't ask anything else that doesn't belong to the interview guide. You don't ask also, you don't skip anything. So you ask, that's very structured, very formal. And then we have the other extreme, where it is unstructured, when you don't have any plan, or you have very brief idea of what you want to talk about, but you don't even bring a guide. You don't even need to have a guide. You only know about topics in general, but it's totally free. And then you have the middle point that we call semi-structured interview, which is like you already have a plan, but you are open to change, and you are open to include new topics that become relevant during the interview. Again, in general terms, we like semi-structured interviews because they are very powerful. Like, you already come with some ideas informed by the theory, hopefully, that of what topics you want to explore more. And then if something comes up, you are okay with navigating that. So in the end, it all depends on the research approach that you have, because structured interviews are much more related to deductive approach, where you are aiming to test things, like if this works or not. So you are very strict. The unstructured view is the opposite, like more in inductive approach, where you are looking for a lot of empirical data and not much literally informed. And semi-structure works for, I would say it works for all of them as well, but it is very related to the abductive approach, where you are informed by the literature, but you also reflect on the literature, and then so you have this kind of balance between empirics and theory. So these are the types of interviews that are very relevant. In the next videos, we will focus about the stages of doing the interviews, before, during, and after.